Alright, so the first thing I'd like to mention before I get started is if you'll check out the description, and I've listed 3 books there, I think. I think I'm going to list 3. And read them in the order in which I have them listed. Mandatory reading if you want to get better at storytelling. Alright, let's go ahead and get started then. Alright, so the first thing is that desire is going to drive the story. This is going to be the main character's desire. And let's imagine this as a desire line. So the desire is going to kind of go like this. This is the beginning of the story, and this is the end of the story. Then sometimes you might have a little epilogue after that. Now this right here will be the goal. Also, I want to say really quick, because this is important, that all the information that I'm sharing I have learned from the masters. That is, those authors that have won awards, literary awards for their writings, for their novels, and that have published novels and have been on the bestsellers list. Because who else to learn from? We don't want to learn from a professor that's never published anything and has never won a literary award. I would rather learn from those that actually were successful in the business and that have won awards. Okay, so we have the desire, which drives the story. So the desire is the driving force of the story. It's what drives the main character from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. The goal is what the main character wants. And you can see these two things are linked. The desire drives her to the goal, to what she wants. And that's important. So this is the basic structure of a story. This is how we start. This is like the spine of the story, so to speak. Desire, goal. Desire drives the main character to the goal. However, if this is all the story had, it would be bland. Jack's desire is to get revenge because somebody raped his sister. And so he goes and kills that somebody. Therefore, his desire is met. He reaches the goal. End of story. That'd be really bland. So in between all of this, what really makes a story, the most important aspect to any story, is conflict, which is frustration. And so the conflict is going to make up majority of your story. And conflict should frustrate your character. I don't mean frustrate as in make them furious. I mean just frustrate as in frustration might make them sad, it might make them angry, it might make them furious, it might make them go off in a rage. But you want the frustration, you want the conflict to range in many emotions. So during the story, the main character has their desire. So let's stick with the Jack. So Jack finds out somewhere before the conflict really begins, before the story is established. Actually, before I continue, let's go back to the beginning. We want to make a story, and when you want to make a story, you want to start with the goal. You want to start with this. This is why I started with desire and goal. I'm actually showing the structure of story in the order that you should think of it, because it'll make your story that much stronger. It'll make it that much easier to develop your story. If you just start with the main character and hey, he has this moral dilemma and so forth, but you don't know what his goal is, you don't know the end of the story, you're going to chug along, and a lot of people have a hard time writing the ending because they don't know the ending before it happens. But if you start with the ending, then you know every scene you create is to get the character to that goal. That's the whole purpose of a story. Every scene is designed to show that driving desire leads the character to their goal. Now they might not get the goal, but their desire has to lead them there. They might lose the battle. That is, Jack wants revenge on his raped sister. So he goes after Bob. Let's say Bob raped his sister. And so he's going down this story arc, and he finally reaches his goal. That is, the story is at its climax when he meets Bob face to face, and that's the final battle. It can be a battle of wits, it can be a battle of actual physical conflict. In this case, it'll be physical conflict. And let's say Bob loses. It doesn't matter if Bob loses. He's reached the goal. The story's done at that point. So whether he defeats Bob or not, the story's over. And there's an underlining story, underlining art to this, and we'll get into that in a minute, which is the theme. And it really doesn't matter what you call things. That was a horrible line. My drawing tablet kind of geeked out on me. That's good enough. So this will be your theme, and it really doesn't matter what you call things. The names really don't mean anything. So call it whatever you want, but I'm gonna explain what they are in a way that makes sense to me. And I wish that someone would have explained this stuff in a way that made sense to me. And I had to read many different books to actually glean all of this information, because they all explain it differently, and none of them explain it quite how it made sense for my brain. So hopefully I can make sense of it to your brain. I'm not sure how many parts this is going to run, so it'll probably run obviously more than one part, because 10 minutes isn't enough to cover the subject. Okay, so we have Desire leading Jack to his goal, which is to get revenge on his sister. In this case, is to find Bob and probably kill him. So if you start with your goal, you know the ending of your story. You know the ending of the story is Jack is going to kill Bob and get revenge on his sister. Or let's say you know the ending of the story. Jack is going to try to kill Bob. He's going to have a self-revelation that killing Bob will not make him feel better. It won't change anything. And he decides not to kill Bob. It doesn't really matter. And each of those endings changes your theme. And the theme is really the reason why you're telling a story. If your story doesn't have a theme, some moral lesson that your main character learns, and you want the main character to learn a moral lesson, and it can be both a physiological moral lesson, one that only affects himself, and it can also be a psychological one, or you can say psychological one only affects himself, and a moral one that affects other people. Like I said, the names don't really matter. You need a moral dilemma that affects the main character only, and he wants to change his life, and you want a moral dilemma that affects other people as well, not just himself. But we'll get into that in a little bit. And I really recommend reading The Anatomy of Story. It really goes into great detail about a lot of this stuff. Okay, so if you start with the ending, it'll make all these scenes, and let's say each one of these lines is like a scene or something, right? This is obviously not a exact representation of how many scenes will be in your story, because there's going to be a lot more than how many lines I can draw, but you get the idea. So each one of those scenes is to drive the main character, to drive Jack to finally get in conflict, to finally find Bob, and for that last scene to take place. And I'm going to change the goal, and I need to know this now before I start writing my story. Otherwise I might write a lot of bullcrap that I don't need, and I need to just go and rewrite all of it, and I'll save a lot of time and frustration if I start knowing my goal, knowing the end of the story. So the end of my story in this case is going to be that Jack is going to run into Bob. They're going to fight. He's going to just about kill him, and he's going to have a revelation, a self revelation, a realization that killing Bob will not change anything. It will not make his sister well. It will not take away the emotional pain in him or his sister. It will do nothing. Revenge will not help him, and that will give me the theme of my story. But so that's the end of my story. And then he's gonna let Bob go, and let's say Bob will go to jail, and he only serves 2 years, and that's fine because Jack had a revelation. All right, so I just want to highlight what we have here before we move on to the next part, because this part's over. The 10 minutes is about over. We have a main character. We have an opponent. The opponent doesn't always have to be a person. We have our desire that drives the story. It's the driving force of the story. And we have our goal, and that's the thing we want to start with, is our goal. That gives us our desire line, and that gives us our main character's reason to move through the story and how to plot the story and how to make the scenes. And then conflict, and we'll get into that and other things that we need to make the story. Alright, so stay tuned for part 2. Or go ahead and click on part 2. It should be there. I think I'll upload them all at once.